Today's Daf, Tuesday, is Daf Tes Amid Aleph. We are up to the 2 dots, 5 lines above the white lines. Tell me, learn. The star, Ketzah, how the star work? Kosav loy alaniyar. He writes on the paper, on a piece of clay, even though it has no value, because this is not being used as money, it's being used as a star. So it's not the value, it's the content. He writes to the father to say, your daughter is engaged to me. Your daughter to be my wife. All these cases, she's Mekudeshes. Says the Gemara, generally speaking, whenever you make a sale, who's the one who writes the star? The vendor. Here, the father of the girl is sort of the vendor, the husband is buying, and the husband writes a star. Where do you find such a star? The seller says, my feel is sold to you. The husband, the buyer, is writing Amar Rava says rather. Hasam mi'inyana de krab which from the context of the psukim. Hasam ksiv, there it says it says over there in the pasuk that you should sell. That if your poor person is, your brother is very poor, and he sold me'achuzasai from his inheritance. So there, it's the vendor is selling. The here, it says by the Kiddushin, it says ki the man takes a woman, so it's all about the buyer. So therefore, you look at the context. The Baal told Rachmana. Says the Gemara, we're talking about Hasanami, even by a sale, see, we find a pasuk where by Yirmiyahu is advised, Sadas by Kesef Yiknu, that he should buy the fields. We're talking about the buyer. We focus on the buyer as well. So Gemara says, Karibe Yikanu, because we have the pasuk, when it comes to Yirmiyahu, read as it says, Sadas by Kesef Yikanu, that the fields with money, Yikanu, make sure you sell it. So we're still talking about the vendor. No, my time so why did you change around the simple meaning, and instead of buyer yiknu, you're changing it to yikanu, to seller? Because you have the other pasuk where it says by the poor person who was impoverished, umachar, and there the pasuk talks about the vendor. Nu is hachanami over here also. When it comes to the woman, on the one hand you have the pasuk ki yikachishisha, which sounds like we talk about the buyer, but there's another pasuk where it talks about where the father says the woman makes a shemra. The father says, "Is beating the sati I gave my daughter to this person," and that's the vendor. So let's change around. Instead of reading it ki yikach, kribe ki yakach, when this person will be taken. That means that it's talking about the woman's side of the family who is prepared to be allowed to be taken. So we're talking about her. The chesiv is beaten zadi shazeh. We just relied on the psukim. This star is this way, and this star is that particular way. And there's a problem if it's halacha Moshe Messinai. And why do we that the star how it works? So we know that a star works by Gittim, by Kiddushin. Why do you need the Gzer Shav of the Yotz of a Haisa? What's halacha Moshe Messinai? But he said another answer is Hasanami Ksiv. Here also we find another pasuk where it says, "Ekach, I will take a sefer hamikne, the sefer of the one who sold it." So clearly it says that the star is written by the vendor. If you paper on a clay, there's no value. She can receive it, or the father, the Kadeshes, she's engaged, even the girl, if she's a naira, if she's 12 years old, she can accept it, provided that the father agrees. Yeah. Provided the father agrees. Who shall I bag? She didn't put 12.5 years old. Of course, of law and your it's obvious if you wrote on a paper, even on a put a hariat if he wrote, you're mekudesh to me, hare atli linti, my wife, hare atmu restlessly, you're engaged to me, mikudeshes, bein ayidea via bein de atzma medaita. It's up, she has to be willing, she can use her father. There's another case where the girl can say to her father, you be my shliach, and you accept to get to me, but it's my decision. Who should bagra? If she becomes an adult, 12.5 years old, then the father has no longer any rights over her, but she could use her father as her shliach. This get that we're talking, this star that we're talking about, we know when it comes to get, you have to write the kos of l'shma. You have to have her in mind. So what about when it comes to the star? When it comes to Kiddushin, when you write the star, do you already have to have her in mind? Do we say havoyasli etzias makshin? We compare get and Kiddushin to each other. And Ma Yitzia being Lishma, just like when it comes to get, you need it to be Lishma, written to her name. Af Havoya being Lishma, so too when it comes to Kiddushin, you need it written to her name. Perhaps Havoyas Lahadodi Makshin, or we say all the different methods of getting engaged are the same when it comes to money. Mahavoy the Kesel, Lebin Lishma, as the Rashi said, when the coins are minted and not made Lishma, obviously. Afavoy the Star, Lebin Lishma. So too when it comes to Star, you don't need the Star to be written Lishma to her name. After he asked the question, he resolved it. We compare all stars to each other. How do you learn star in the first place? We learned the whole idea of a star Kiddushin from Gittin, therefore it has to be the same. And that is, it has to be done Lishma. Says about it further, eat what we learned, Kosu Lishma, let's say you wrote the star, had her in mind, but the Shalei Medaita, you did not ask him beforehand whether she's ready, you didn't ask her that I'm writing a star. Machlekes Rishonim, are we talking about before even you propose to get married to her? Or we're talking about even if you propose to get married to her, but you didn't ask her, should I write a star or not? Rav Ravina both say Mekadeshes, that she is engaged. Because as long as you wrote a Lishma, it doesn't matter whether she died to why, because just like by get. When you write a get, you have to write the shema. Do you need to have her opinion? No, you can force her to take a get. And a puppet of Shabbi, now the Gemara says interesting. And this is the beauty of when you learn how the Amoraim were only interested in the truth. They weren't interested in just winning the argument, they were interested in the truth. So the Papa said, I'll explain both sides of the argument. I'm going to Papa. I'll explain you their basis and I'll explain our basis. I'll explain you their basis. See the yachts of a house. Since we learn out Gittin and maybe learn a star Kiddushin from Gittin, Makish Avayutzi, Mayitzi Lishma Lishma Lebedaita, Af Havoynam Lishma Lebedaita. Over also, just like over there, it's written Lishma. If you don't hear consent, same thing here. And I'll tell you my reason. The yachts of a house of Makish Havoyel, you compare the two. Mayitzi Bina Das Makna, when it comes to a get, you need the person who is doing the shouldering the whole the release is the husband, so therefore he has to be aware of it. Af Havoya Bina Das Makna. Over here too, you need to have the person which is the husband here. You need the woman. The woman here, she's the one who's releasing herself in a way, putting herself into this condition. So therefore, you need her consent as well. And that's why I hold you need her consent. And the argument is, the famous argument of doin minov ukabasa, doin minov umina. That was whenever you compare two things, it has to be exact in every single detail or just a general principle, and then you can interpret in different ways. Says the Gemara, makes us a question, ain't kaisin study is a suin element ashner. I'll ask you a question that says, no, but I say you don't write star erison or Nesuyin only, they both agree. My love, what's a star Erison? Star Erison is a star for Kiddushin. It says clearly they both have to agree. But Nesuyin Mamish, and we're like, no, Star Psikta. We're talking about a Star Psikta. These are the Tnoim, where the parents, so each one promises, my daughter marries, I'll give you so much. And the other one says, my son marries your daughter, I'll give so much. And we have Kama how much you give for your daughter, for your son so and so. Your daughter they went ahead then if the son and the daughter decide to get married. These are things that are kind of with just saying. You don't even have to write a star. You can just say it. The fact that both Chas and Kala decided to get married based on your agreement, that hana that you both received, that they followed through, is tantamount to a kinyan, and therefore you are you're totally committed. Whether you have a right to write a shtar or not, but maybe not, because they want it to remain as a milva al pet. And the question is really, what is here how is this a kinyan? Is this a kinyan, proper kinyan matayda? Is only midrabanon? This is a fascinating chakira at length with Kavitz, Shiurim, and others. How do we understand kinyan? When you have a kinyan, you also have to have in mind that you're buying or selling. So there's two ways of understanding. What role is having in mind the das, and what role is the actual kinyan, the meshicha, dragging the hakbah, picking up? One way of learning pshat is having in mind means that I'm prepared to allow the kinyan to do what it has to do. But what actually causes the transaction to happen is the kinyan, the mice of the kinyan, taking out of my rishus, the meshicha, and bringing it to the other person's domain. That's one way of learning. The other way of learning is no. The main part of a kinyan is my das, my intent. The main part of kinyan is that I am prepared to give this to you and you're prepared to accept it. The kinyan, the ma'aseh that we're doing is to manifest what my das is. How do we know what your das is? We don't know how to read minds. But if you do something like Mashiach Akbar, it proves to us what your das is, but it's a das. And if you learn that way, we understand those opinions that say that this is Mahat Torah. There's no kinyan happening here. But we now know that your das, normally we don't know your das 100%, you really want to sell it. But in this case, we know 100% is your das, because when the chassan and kala get married, based on the commitments that both of you made, you're 100% pleased. And therefore, we know 100% this is your das. We don't need the actual kinyan. So therefore, Mahat Torah is valid. And others say, no, we need the ma'aseh kinyan. This is only Midurabban. Second about it further, Bia is another method of Kiddushin. No, how do we know Bia is a method of Kiddushin? So we'll have a machlekes two different sukkah. The simple pasuk is ki yikach ish isha, a man takes a woman, ubal, and then they have intimate relations. So it sounds like Bia works. But there's another pasuk when it talks about that if a man was found living with a married woman, and they both, and they both consensual, they both get killed, and it says in the pasuk over there, a woman who is a bu'ulas baal. We describe a married woman, we say a bu'ulas baal. In other words, how did a husband become a husband? Through Bia. So we see that Bia is a way of getting married. Says the Gemara, and how do we know? Said the pasuk bu'ulas baal. Melamed, what does that teach you? Shenasala baal. How did he become the husband? Through Bia. However, others say, is it so mean? Is it so bad? Shishon and Rebbe. What Rebbe says is much more straightforward. Rebbe said, that you're kind with beer. What do you have to find this other pasuk bu'ulas ball? So the Gemara, so Rabbi Yechon explains. From the pasuk yikach ishish. Remember, what do we learn from the word yikach? Kicha was the effort that he used money. If I only looked at that pasuk, you know what I would say? Ki yikach ish isha ubal. That you need to do two things to get married. You need to do kesef and bia. That's what we would think. You need both things, kesef and bia, to get engaged. That's why I bring the pasuk bu'ulas ball. The only thing that they did was bia, and this they considered marriage. Says the Gemara. That's a question. How can you even think? You, Rabbi Yechon, tell me that from the pasuk yikach ish ubal, you would have thought that you need to do two components. You need to do kesef and bia. How can you think that? I'll tell you why you can't think that. The Omar Achmana Beskila, a girl that is engaged and she's a naira, that means that she's a psula, she's a virgin. And if she commits adultery, if they get skila, how is that possible? You're telling me the only way to get engaged is through money and bia, which means that she's no longer a virgin. So how can you ever have a case of a virgin who's engaged? They did exactly what you said. We need both. Kesef and bia. Bully, she's no longer a virgin. There's no skila. If you get kesef and no bia, you tell me that I'm engaged. Lav klumi, just like a regular single girl. Amru Rabboni Kameda Abaya. Rabboni came to Abaya, and they said, well, we could figure a way. No, maybe Rabbi Yechon is right. From Kika Jabal, you need both components. So how do you ever have a virgin, a case of a naira marosa? We'll tell you how. What happens if the husband to be had be with her non-conventional way? If he had non-conventional way, so therefore, on the one hand, they're engaged. On the other hand, she's still a virgin. And therefore, if she's still a virgin, that's how you can have a case of skila naira marosa. Even though if you get engaged, you have to be as well. I'm going to buy it no. The famous argument which we'll tell you about in 1 minute, is only when it comes to strangers. There's an argument if somebody has a non-conventional relation with a woman, whether she's still a virgin or not. But if it's the husband itself and it's consensual, then even hakol. Everyone agrees that if they had a consensual intimacy, even though it's non-conventional, she is no longer a virgin. She's no longer a virgin, so therefore your case is no good. And it's a good question to ask Rabbi Yechon. How can you ever have a case of naira marasa, a virgin, if you need kesef and bia? What's this Rebbe about? The time we learned bola yonoshim. Let's say if 10 people, let's say, came along and they with this girl. That's that deserves skila. 10 people, Naimaros, came and had non-conventional intimacy with her. Adayin Yipsula, Kulam skila, all get skila. Because non-conventional, she's still a virgin. And Rebbe says, no, even non-conventional, she's no longer a virgin. So therefore what? So it's only as long as these are strangers and non-consensual. But if it's a husband consensual, everyone agrees that she's no longer a virgin. So the question goes back. How could Rabbi Yechon say we would have thought you need kesef and beer to get her betrothed? So how can you ever have a case of an engaged woman who is still a virgin? What about if he got engaged with a star? Kesef needs beer, but star does not need beer because we learn star from Gittin, and Gittin doesn't is on its own, works solo. So too, star works solo. You don't need beer, and that's the case of Nair Hamarasa. No one can have a virgin, a girl engaged with a virgin if she got engaged to a star. Hoy the game in a moitz, he's not going to get. It's only on his own game in the machis. And when I ask a question, Rabbi Yechon, who learned from Bula's ball, what does he learn from the word ball? Now that we know from Bula's ball that be alone does it, so why taka does it tend to say a ball? He enough. He needs it to tell you that only a woman that you marry you can do through intimacy. But a Jewish maid you cannot acquire through intimacy. Why would you think you could? Because I would have thought. Let's learn Kal V'Chaim from a Yavama. My Yavama ain't nikva kesef that cannot be purchased with money. Yet niknas b'biyah, that means biyah is much more powerful than kesef. You can acquire a Yavam zusha niknas b'kesef, and amavriya that can be purchased with kesef. Surely should be able to be acquired a biyah, and you can biyah, and therefore we need this pasik upal. That only in this case biyah works. Says, how can you say that? Mali Yavama can't go in medicine. There's a logic to it. No, you know why Yavama? Not because B is more powerful, but because they're already betrothed. The Torah already bonded them together, and therefore B is sufficient. But Amavriya, B is not sufficient. On the contrary, B is weak. No, Sagar. I would have thought Hoyel because another reason. I would have thought why a maid should be able to be through intimacy acquired, because it says a Jewish maid. It says there that it talks about that if the master decides to marry her or gives it to the son. And says, takes another wife. So we're comparing the maid to another wife. I would have thought, you could use beer because that's Bula's bowl. So to a maid can be acquired through intimacy. That's why it says, but not by a maid. No, the Rebbe who uses a bowl to teach you that a woman could be acquired through intimacy, how does he know to negate a maid? How does he know? He learns it because the very same word it could have said uba'al. Why is it uba'allah? To teach you two dinim. My uba'allah, you should be boil her. Uba'al, first of all, be as effective. Uba'allah means you should have intimacy only with her, and not with who? Not with the maid. The maid is not effective. Well, the Rav who learned the third thing from this word of ball, the Ahmad, he said, Barahina, this rabbi called Barahina, Asberly once explained to me, that what Kiddushin says, that means what happened in a case where somebody gave a Kiddushin to two girls, he doesn't remember which one he got engaged to, the two sisters. So he cannot marry either one of them. And why is that? Because each one is a suffix, maybe it's a sister of the one that you betrothed already. Right, and so it said over there. So he says, so that's a Ba'i's opinion. Rabbi says no Kiddushin is effective. Why not? Because it says because Barahina told him when you get engaged a woman, and you're able to take it to the next stage. But in this case, you cannot take it to the next stage because each one might be the sister of the one that you got betrothed to. Therefore, there's no Kiddushin in the first place. So Kiddushin, we have Kiddushin, if you cannot turn into be as not Kiddushin, and so he learned that from the word ball. So my equal but how do you learn three dinim from one word? So yes, he could. Because in Kenich could have said, okay, we already said a ball, teach a beer, ubala, teach only in this case, not a maid. It could have said oibala. Why is it ubala and shmamino? And after the kesef, it has to be able to continue to the next stage to beer. Rebbe, what does he do with the pasuk that Yechon uses? A buller's ball. What do you do with it? So what Hayabah needs it. Only one, like we said before, the only one who's a non-conventional way makes her no longer a virgin is the husband. Now, why? Because it says bu'ulas bal. The husband, regardless of how they had intimacy, she's now no longer a virgin. She's a bula. But anybody else is not, like the Chachamim, she's still a virgin. Says the Gemara, but the Rebbe, we just quoted the Rebbe who said that she is, Rebbe said what? That she's no longer a virgin. Because she's no longer a virgin. But Rebbe says, the Rebbe says they're no longer a virgin even by strangers. The Rebbe says even by strangers no longer a virgin. Why? It's not just a husband. Rebbe agrees with the Rabban when it comes as far as a penalty. For example, if she wasn't engaged, and let's say she wasn't engaged, and a bunch of people, if there's someone rapes her, they have to pay a knas, or a seducer, they have to pay a knas if she wasn't engaged. Rebbe's made it that if 10 people came along, if they all did non-conventionally, they're all considered a virgin, they all have to pay the knas. So he's made it by knas. Omar Rav Zayda made the Rebbe lina knas, the kulam mishal, that they all have to pay. So therefore, and says the Gemara, what's the difference? Why, when it comes to when she's already married, engaged, we say that Rebbe says non-conventional is still considered is no longer a virgin. Why by knas? We say no, she's still a virgin. Have a pasuk. It says the meisa isha sheshochav imo levader. If somebody raped a girl and she was engaged, he gets killed levade on his own. What do you mean on his own? And not her. It's an extra pasuk. So tell you that only the first person and the rest, since she's no longer a virgin, they get also punished. They hold that everybody, in all cases, she's no longer a virgin. So what do they do with Levade? The Rabbanan holds that she's still a virgin in all cases. She is still a virgin. So in other words, the Rabbanan holds she's still a virgin if 10 people, a night, a marasa, 10 people, she's a virgin. Rebbe says that no, only the first one is a virgin, not the rest. How does the Rebbe know only the first one? Because it says the person who committed that sin, only Levadi, only him, and not what? And not the other 9 people, because she's no longer a virgin. But generally speaking, if you did it non-conventional way, she's still a virgin. And that's what we need both tell you, but by husbands, not so. What did Rabbanan do with Levadi? They say that she's still considered a virgin if it's non-conventional way. What do they do with Levada? Look at the Tanya, we learned Umeisu Gam Shneim, that they both should be put to death. The man and the woman, they committed adultery while she was engaged. Until they are both equal. They both have to be liable. They both have to be. She has to be over bas mitzvah, he over bar mitzvah. And at the end is number of a meis haish asher imo levada. And only that person means even if she's underage, he is liable. So the Gemara, but Rabbi Yechon, this is Rashi's way of understanding Gemara. But Rabbi Yechon, how does he know? Since he uses Bula's ball or something else, how does he know? He could have just said Bu'ulas ish. How does Rabbi Yechon know that a husband in a non-conventional way makes her, she's no longer a virgin? Since he uses Bula's ball to tell you that's the way that a man can have interest with his wife and become engaged to her. He said, could have said Bu'ulas ish, my Bu'ulas ball, Shmam the title, and 2 different from it. First of all, that's how you became a husband, by getting her engaged through Bia. And the second thing is that a husband, even non-conventional way, is considered Bia, and she's no longer considered a virgin. We'll stop here.